Welcome, everybody, to another episode of Your Spiritual Journey. This is Dr. Bob, and this is the space and the place where we talk about things that are important to your soul. As always, we hope that you will like us, subscribe if you're watching us on YouTube, and maybe even support us on Patreon. We'd like to be here for a long time to come. Today's guest is Kelly Brown. She's the owner of Inner Light on Beverly Road, which is in Mount Lebanon, where she was born and raised. Kelly's been dedicated to spiritual endeavors all her life, notably in her insatiable curiosity of seeking a deeper meaning in everything. And I met Kelly at her shop in Mount Lebanon, and I'm going to tell you, whoever the buyer is for that shop does a heck of a job. And my assumption is it's you, Kelly. Now, Kelly's also a dancer. She started dancing at the age of 3. Her history with dance elicits an ability to permeate a mood, shape, or feeling while she paints. And that's the thing we want to get to, because Kelly is an artist. She's a painter and quite the artist. She's a fully self-taught spiritual artist using her knowledge of Qigong energy within her work, as well as dance and research topics, including history, archaeology, quantum physics, sacred geometry, and mathematics. So we've got a lot of interesting topics to get into. For 15 years, she lived abroad in Bordeaux, France, with her French husband, Olivier?
Correct. Yes.
And 2 daughters. Her French-American persona can be sensed in her work. Her styles vary from her most known work being the Bird/Nature collection, but she also offers abstracts, nudes, and still life. And I'm going to have a link to Kelly's website from my website so that you can get a visual picture of all that great work that she does. Her artwork has been used in various television series, featured on film sets for CBS and Netflix, and she accepts commission work. So I'm going to stop there and get into Kelly's spiritual journey. So Kelly, welcome.
Thank you, Bob.
And as you know, at this point, I just ask you to talk about your spiritual journey from childhood to the present, and then I'll ask you some questions.
Sounds good. Feel free to interrupt at any moment in time. The journey, I think, intellectually started for me at 7 when I had an argument with a brother of mine. And I remember storming outside and sitting under a tree and looking up to the sky and being like, God, there has to be more to life than this. So it started young for me, around 7, which was also around the time that my parents divorced. And from that point forward, I would say it was pretty typical of a child growing up in the 70s, where we went to church and went through the church program. I was raised a Presbyterian and got confirmed in middle school. And my father died when I was 15, just about to turn 16. And if anybody who has experienced loss at a young age, you know that it propels you into a depth of asking bigger questions than you would probably normally do. And because my father was 49 years old when he passed, it's very young.
Yeah.
The questions were bountiful. And because I am who I am, they were big questions, and I went seeking wherever I could seek. And as a little girl, I was fascinated by older people. I always thought that they held the wisdom and they held the clues to what I was seeking. And throughout my life, I can say that I definitely met a few that fulfilled my curiosity and my insatiability, I would say. But I'm kind of projecting into the future. Let me go back to the timeline at hand because I think it's easier to follow. So I lose my father at 15, and then I became very involved with Christianity, and I became a born again and went to a camp called Windy Gap, which is a wonderful camp that's still going on today. And I sent my youngest daughter to Windy Gap. And there I became a born again and got very deep into studying the Bible and was extremely dedicated to it for about 2.5, 3 years, where I would do 2, 3, 4 times a week of Bible study. And then some of the questions came that I didn't really like the answers to, didn't feel quite as encompassing as I wanted. And then I went off to college. And I met one of those elders, I'll call him. He was a communications professor of mine, which was my degree was in communications, interpersonal and intrapersonal. And he was very wise and had a bigger scope and keenly offered me at graduation something that I didn't realize until just a few years ago, the power of. And he offered me to be part of Phi Kappa Phi, which I proudly wear on my jean jacket, the little pin. And it was an academic honors. And fascinating. Sadly, he's not with us anymore, but fascinating. The knowledge of what that meant came to me just several years ago. So when I say these elders have come into my life that have a scope of knowledge that was bigger than mine. So he offered me to look at life in a different way, and that's when I got introduced to different aspects that you would have in spirituality. Everything from reading Lua Biscaglia at the time, Road Less Traveled, just listening to quotes and authors. And also during that time in college, I worked for 2 brothers that had a store in Boston. And one of the brothers was very spiritually minded and introduced me to also many books, the book Siddhartha and some creative visualization books. But I do digress. I got to go back in time again. Sorry, I tend to spiral. It's part of the Qigong in me. A lot of Taoists will spiral, but they ultimately get to the point. I do my best to stay linear, but certain things trigger me to go to the past. And one of the things is I grew up in a household where my mother was very, very intuitive and very spiritual. In middle school, I was sleeping with books under my pillow. I was sleeping with Edgar Cayce books under my pillow because he said...
Well, that's how he did it.
That's how he did it. And I have a tendency to have a lot of books around me as I sleep. So middle school, I was doing that. In 7th and 8th grade, I was sleeping with some of his books. My mother was a real pioneer here in Pittsburgh. She was doing Rolfing in the early 80s, which people still today don't really know about. Feels like she single-handedly supported the Back to Basics was a Whole Foods store in Mount Lebanon. She was studying iridology and massage and Reiki way back before it was even topics at hand.
Yeah.
So that is very much in my blood and in my DNA. Back to college. I continued my quest and my journey, and I became an entrepreneur with my husband back in 91. We started our journey, and we knew we wanted to do something together.
Well,
Originally,
you're in France yet, or
no,
you're
we're in
still
Boston,
here?
right?
You're in
So
Boston.
at 18
Okay.
I leave Pittsburgh and I go to Boston and I study at Northeastern University, and I saw my husband from afar, but it took us a year and a half to meet. I do admittedly say that I stalked the Frenchman, and
Okay.
I used to watch him from afar because being in Mount Lebanon, especially in the South Hills, people will know we call it a bubble. And the French and all of the ethnic groups were fascinating to me, and I would just watch them from afar. And I knew people who knew him, and I found out his name, and we ultimately found each other. And I can say clearly, and I know even more now today, that I was on a quest to find him. And I started very young. I started in elementary school. I don't know if other kids do this, but I just was looking for that person who was going to walk through life with me from a very young age. And I just kind of went next.
Yeah.
Next. And he's a very big part of my journey, a very big part. So where are we? We are back in college.
Yeah, we're in Boston.
Back in Boston.
And you found the love of your life.
I found the love of my life, and we knew we wanted to do something together. And he had been working with somebody who was moving to Costa Rica, and he said, "Kel, we're going to move to Costa Rica, and we're going to make donuts."
Okay.
Because Costa Rica doesn't have donuts and they love sugar, supposedly, right? I'm like, okay, I'm on board. And then we started taking classes at the community center, and I was taking Spanish. And one day I was trying to basically speak French in a Spanish class, and I realized Spanish wasn't for me. I panicked, and we pulled out of the whole entire venture. Now, the funny thing is, Bob, it is so magnificent how God works. I'm driving here today. I had no idea how to get here, so I'm following my GPS, and I come through Lawrenceville, and I have to take a right on Main Street. And what do I see right on the corner is Oliver's Donuts.
Oh.
As I'm praying the whole way coming over here, I'm like, God, just be with me so I know what to say, so I know which direction you want me to go in. I see this Oliver's Donuts, and I wasn't even planning on talking about this, but anyway, it's unraveling, and it's just the beauty of how God works. Signs and symbols is going to be a big part of our conversation as I progress into my story. So we pull out of that venture, and we're trying to figure out what to do. And one night, there was a terrible storm in Boston. And typically you don't hear, like I don't recall hearing bad thunderstorms. I mean, crashing thunderstorms. And it woke me up in the middle of the night, and I couldn't sleep. I had like this vision in my mind. I went into the living room. I grabbed all my magazines, and with like Edward Scissorhands, I just started going, and I put everything and glued it into this book. And at 6:30, I went in and I woke up my boyfriend, and I said, "This is what we're doing." And he just looked through it. And the idea was to feel this comfort of being in a garden setting and having a cup of tea or coffee or just really nice food and nurturing food. And I said, and we're going to call it the Garden of Eden. And sure enough, he was on board, and we started our venture. And that was our first. We've been entrepreneurs since we were like 23 years old.
So this was
In Boston.
In Boston, you started this venture.
We started
the Garden of Eden.
The Garden
Okay.
of Eden. And the Garden of Eden won many awards of our sandwiches. It was a lovely spot. We basically became a depot of all the best bakers in the city, because not all bakers do everything well.
Mm-hmm.
And so we would get baguettes from one, we had French pastries from another, we had sticky buns from another. This is at the time that Starbucks didn't exist. This is at a time that coffee shops didn't exist. So I've been my whole life 5 to 10 years ahead of the norm. It's just kind of something that I've always had. And so it stood out in Boston, and we went into an area that originally had been a very beautiful area of Boston. And through time, it had some really bad neighborhoods. And like most cities, the gay population tends to come into those areas, refurbish it, and then it all shifts. Mm-hmm. And we went in still when it was kind of a dangerous area. And I began to understand the importance of local politics, or at least starting to understand the importance of being a part of your community, because I realized that we needed to have that community support, one, to get the type of licensings that we needed to have, but two, we also, it was really good to have the voices of the people that you were going to be serving, right?
Sure.
So we began the venture in this area of Boston, which is called the South End. And slowly we started to attract other businesses along there. And the business owners then started to create their own community. And we realized that there was an imaginary line. And what was it that would attract people? And we said it was light, which is interesting because here again, my business is called Inner Light, but it's evolved many times through that. But the one gentleman who was from the Middle East that had a beautiful Middle Eastern restaurant, and I decided to go door to door to all of the businesses, and we acquired money, and we created an association and wrote bylaws, and we realized there was an invisible line that we needed to get people from Boston to this part of the city, and what would do it more than light. So we put up a big banner to let people know that there was a business association, and we got money from the associations, and we just strung lights for 3 blocks long, and all of a sudden people were like, what's going on in the South End of Boston? And that began the journey of that part of our business. Well, after 5 years of running the business, everything seems to run in fives, which I now understand a little bit more too. It happens to be my number. We decided it was either to expand or to sell. Well, we decided to sell. And at that time, went and helped some friends build their business, which was a soap business, which has evolved into a huge line. My husband did one aspect of the business, I did the other. It was called Fresh, and it still exists today, and we joyfully put our heart and soul into that business and helped it grow like an American dream. And today the business is running. It's owned by Louis Vuitton Moet Hennessy, and can be found in Sephora today. So it's a large business. But before that transaction happened, my husband and I left, and we decided we wanted to go to France. So in 2000, we make the decision to leave everything behind in Boston and to go to France, because I had made a personal commitment that I wanted to speak French before we had children. And we didn't have children yet. And I thought, oh, well, let's go for 6 months to a year so I could learn the language. Well, we ended up spending 15 years. It took me a long time to learn the language. Within a couple weeks of going into a school, which was a 40-hour-a-week language program, I got pregnant with our first daughter. And I can't say I was the best of students.
Well,
But
you had other things on your mind
I
all
had,
of a sudden.
I was incubating something else, but I realized that I was doing it my own way. And my own way was, I was learning intellectually from the left brain, but I was also living it in the right brain and having the experience and learning how to merge the two. And later on, that becomes an important aspect to my own personal journey. Again, something I forgot to tell you about was in my 20s when we had the cafe, Garden of Eden. One day, a woman comes walking in, and with her, this giant swoosh of knowledge, and she would be probably another one of those elders that I would say, all I knew is that I wanted what she had. There was something about her, and as I got to know her and befriended her and became part of her body of knowledge, which really focused in on the shadow self. And the shadow self, I spent 5 years living inside and out, upside and down, backwards and forwards, looking at all aspects of the shadow self. And the good and the bad about that program, because that program really taught me how knowledge can be isolating and how that is not an effective way to go about your spiritual journey.
Okay, you just used the term that program. So does that mean she was teaching courses
Yes.
in this area?
She was
Okay.
teaching courses in this area, and it was, for her, it was speaking about the identity, but today we would call it the shadow self, the egoic self. It has many names. It's been packaged in a lot of different ways. But basically it's the shadow self, the part of us that thinks that it's running the show, but it really isn't.
Yeah.
It's this composite you that really keeps you away from your true self, your mission here on earth. We'll use languaging from today. And it keeps you small.
Yeah.
Right? And I was so grateful to have that experience, because I learned a tremendous amount, the positive and the negative being that words and information can be weaponized.
Mm-hmm.
It can be weaponized against you and against the ones that you love. And why that is so important is I believe when you go on your spiritual journey, it's really easy to think that you're the only one doing it, and that you can't find knowledge anywhere at any time, even making a turn onto Main Street and seeing Oliver's Donuts, right? It can come from anybody. It can come from a tree, it can come from an insect, it can come from a blade of grass, it can come from the sun, and it can come anywhere in any way. And so the negative aspect of that body of knowledge is that it was presented and packaged that it had to look a certain way. And through many trials and tribulations, I realized that that was the dark self about that body of knowledge. And so we went on our way. And when I left left the cosmetic company, before we moved to France, I did a book called The Artist's Way, Julia Cameron, who many people know. I think she's well into her 20 years, but she used to be the author of Miami Vice. She was the writer of Miami Vice. And she created a book about breaking through artist blocks, especially journalists, when you write a writer's block. But she quickly found out that it opens up to any kind of hidden artistic talent. And it's an intense course. It's an 8-week journaling course. And I did it, and I started to have a breakthrough with writing, because I was writing a lot for the Fresh Company. Writing, poetry, some painting, and then moving to France, it started to go into more manual things like barrette making and sewing and drawing. And the reason I bring this story up is because it plays another big part 15 years later, when a dear friend, as we were tormented whether we should stay in France or come back, the book comes back into my life. But I jump yet again.
Okay, because right now I don't see you doing any painting.
Not yet.
So
there was drawing and sketching back when I had my baby. So I had been dancing my whole life. I told you I started at 3, and I had been dancing throughout this whole time. And after I had my first baby, I went to the gym, and I found a class that had some movement into it. But it really wasn't until, I think it was 2009, I came back to America, and I went to a gym here in Pittsburgh, and they offered a class. It was called Zumba. And I'm like, what is this? And after the class, I was absolutely elated. I was just jumping for joy. I'm like, oh my gosh, Oliver, we could totally do this. I could teach this with my eyes closed. And because it was basically dances from all over the world, and every 3 minutes you changed style and you changed music. Well, as a dancer, I was classically trained, but spent a great deal of time exploring many different types of dance as I got into college, and I danced my way through college, and had many friends from all different nationalities. That was the nice thing about Boston. We had friends from Haiti and friends from Colombia, Argentina. We just had friends from everywhere. And I always embraced that because I was curious about what they knew and who they were. So in Boston, my husband was exporting antiques to America. And I was having babies and learning to be a mom. And before we had our second, I found out that France was having a training on being a Zumba instructor. I quickly signed up for it, and I headed to Paris, and I went through the certification program to be a Zumba instructor. Now, why that's important is because it became a huge part of our journey. In 2008, the antique business, and he was exporting the antiques to America, and we were trying to decide if we were going to leave because the industry bottomed out and nobody was buying antiques in America because of the economics. And so we had to decide, were we going to come back or were we going to stay? Well, we decided to stay, and we decided to open up an English, to teach English, an English school. And when we went to the mayor of our town, and we said, well, can I teach anything? And he said, yes, absolutely. I said, well, can I teach dance? And he said, yes, you can. So I became a Zumba instructor, and I taught out of our village. Now, for French women, they don't have the ability to do a lot of sports. There's just not a lot of sports for women. One of the big things that they do is dance when they're a young girl. They also play tennis, and they do horseback riding. And if you want to play soccer, you play with the boys. So when dance became a sport in France, it blew up because all of these women had the ability to find a sport that they could do, because at a certain point in time you stop going to nightclubs, but yet you have this innate desire to want to express yourself through movement. So our business blew up and we had 600 students, and I had a team. Yeah, I had a team of instructors, and we represented the clothing, because Zumba had its own clothing for the southwest of France, and I would travel all over, and it was a remarkable experience. And I was very much on stage and sometimes performing and teaching to 10 students and sometimes to 3,000. So we had really big events, and then we had everything in between. And what was important for that was for the energy to start to release in my body, which we'll call Kundalini energy, and starting to feel that movement and that introspection that you need as you start to go on your spiritual journey. I started to feel that movement on the outside, and building that movement on the outside with the dance steps, but also how that kind of came up and out as an expression. As we were doing this, this lurking feeling of coming back to America had always been with us. And it was really time, because our eldest was getting to the age where she was about to go into high school. We had had a second baby at 2, who was 4 years apart. One was born in Provence and one was born in Bordeaux. And I've always said one is like a fairy. The one that was born in Provence, she came out, her name is Audrey. And I named her because I thought she was going to come out with big brown eyes and brown skin. And I've always loved Audrey Hepburn. And she came out as fair and snowy white skin and blue eyes. But I loved the name. So we kept her Audrey, but I always called her my fairy. She's so ethereal. And then Chloe, our second, came out, and I always called her my elf. And she has the dark hair and the dark eyes and is mischievous like an elf can be. And they're just beautiful aspects of heaven and earth, which is what my journey has all been about. I know I'm bouncing around, Bob.
That's okay. Life is not linear.
As we're trying to decide to go back, a dear friend of mine sends me the same book, not knowing that I had done it 15 years prior in 2000, The Artist's Way. So I decide, okay, this is an omen. I'm going to do this book again. And during that time, I had 150 paintings come out of me in 6 months. So I started the book in 2014, and in 2015, when I finished the book, like in the springtime, took me weeks to go through it, I had this tremendous blow of expression. And I was sometimes doing a painting a day, sometimes doing 2 and 3 paintings or sketches a day. And that's why I had so much. It's designed to unlock your hidden artistic talents.
You know, there's no such thing as coincidence.
But no.
Just to talk about synchronicity for a minute, I was getting a reading from a psychic on Monday. Yes, on Monday. And I asked the question, okay, what artistic expression or creative expression have I not tapped into yet, or have I exhausted my creative expression? You know, I'm a writer and a podcaster, interviewer. And he checked in and said, you're due to do visual arts. And now you've recommended the book to me that I need to know about.
Oh, wonderful. I highly recommend it. We've taught it at my class, at my store.
Yeah.
It's very powerful. It appears as if it's not, because it's asking kind of childlike questions, but it's in those questions where things got locked in at childhood that we need to explore and allow ourselves to be childlike again in order to unlock them.
So what medium are you working in now? What, not now, I mean at that point.
At that point in time, a lot of acrylics, sketching in acrylics. But for me, it was about, because dance was such a big part of it, I don't have formal training, but I have, because of dance, this innate ability for texture and silhouette and depth and form that I was able to transcribe onto the canvas. So my daughters have, taken classic art classes where they grid everything, and that's not me. I literally am dancing on the canvas. So I finger paint. Almost all of my artwork is finger painted. And with that, what has happened is, and it might appear years later, is images appear in my artwork that I don't even know. Or sometimes a customer or somebody who has purchased my artwork will be like, oh, I see this now. This comes out. And it has become quite prophetic, my art. And I think that's because there's a link into the research that I do. But I'm jumping yet again.
No, and again, with the synchronicity, I was on the Bodhi Tree website today. I don't know if you're familiar with that. On Facebook. And they had two different artists who were teaching classes or having workshops in the very process that you're talking about, for people to work through their emotions and things, just finger painting.
Yeah, it's powerful.
And
it's powerful, especially for somebody like me, who's so moved by music, the music then becomes a key component of being able to access that other realm. Yeah.
So I can visually picture what you're talking about.
Right.
Anyway. Okay, so
as I'm journaling, a few things happen. I started to learn how to go into an altered state, and there were a couple times that I felt this energy come in through my left ear and kind of took over. It knocked me out a bit and would take over my pencil, and my pencil started writing. Well, one of those times, I would get up early before my kids would get ready to go to school, and one of those times, there was this energy that called itself Myra, and it gave me all sorts of information. As I was getting my kids ready from school, I'm like, I wonder if there was somebody in Greek, because it told me it was Greek, in Greek mythology that had this name. Get my kids off to school. And then this is the moment in time that there was the connection between what Spirit was telling me and what the research came together as one. And sure enough, there was. It was a story of a young woman who, I won't go into her backstory, but she didn't want to live or die. And so she asked the gods, help me, I don't want to live or die. So she gets turned into the myrrh tree. Okay? And that becomes part of my initial research of understanding what a dryad is, which is my most sold print. Okay. It's called Rapture of the Dryads. And a dryad in Greek mythology is the energy that exists inside of a tree. there's hamadryads and there's dryads. A hamadryad, when the tree dies, the hamadryad dies with it. But a dryad, it will jump into another tree if its house gets destroyed. Well, at this time, I was also fascinated in my research by dolmens, menhirs, and places like Stonehenge and Karnak. And I talked my family into going up, and we discovered Brittany and the west coast of France. And I took my kids to see lots of standing stones. They're like, Mom, no more stones.
Yeah.
But what I realized is that I was starting to tap into these earth energies. And so I could put my hand on a stone and I would just get these visions. And going to Karnak, I had one of the most profound moments of my spiritual experience, where we drove into the town and there was a little market, and I saw this older man and he was selling pendants, and it was almost as if we had transcended time and space, and I was able to hear him. Completely hear him telepathically. And I walked away and I'm like, what the heck just happened? I swung back around and I bought one of his pendants, and I said, what does this mean? And he said, oh, it's a mystery. The fascinating thing with him is when we spoke words, the connection kind of got lost. But when I just looked at his eyes, the message that I got was, I felt like I came from the root of a tree. And it was such a profound sensation for me. I walked away and like, did you guys all feel that? My family was with me, and like, no, I have no idea what you're talking about. I'm like, it was massive. It was like, shook me in my boots. And that experience kept me digging into understanding what dryads were, and this experience about myrrh and the myrrh tree. During this whole process of those 6 months of making all of that artwork, I found out that I had a different biological father at 47 years old.
Okay.
So the roots of my tree...
How did you find that out?
It's actually a really magical, beautiful story. But the roots of my tree were literally being excavated. I don't know how much detail to give here, perhaps where we are on time.
Yeah.
Well, I'll speed it up a little bit. Basically, I find out that I have a different biological father, and he's in Pittsburgh. So as we were trying to decide whether to come back, where to America, the answer gets questioned. We're going back to Pittsburgh because I had a mother who was aging. I needed to understand this whole story, and my father was aging, and I wanted my family to get to know him. So we came back, and within, sadly, a few months, he got diagnosed. So I became pretty much a caregiver for my mother and father. But he never had kids, and all of a sudden he had a daughter and granddaughters and a son-in-law, and made the last 4.5 years of his life really quite beautiful, and united a big hole in my soul, and probably why I've been searching from a very young age for something much deeper. And with the discovery of that, blew open these abilities that I now have been fostering. I want to go back to the story of the myrrh tree, because it's an important one. I decide to paint myrrh, And I do her as a single painting, a large painting, the largest one I had ever done. And as I looked at it, I realized that it needed to be a triptych. So I get 2 panels for the other sides. And as I continue to research this, I realize that Myrrh was the mother of Adonis. So I make the 2 side panels, one of his birth and one of his death. And I study deeper into this, into Phoenician mythology. By the way, I'm in America now when I do this. And I'm also preparing for my first exhibit in America because I found out that my father was dying and I wanted him to see what I was capable of. So before he died, I wanted to have an exhibit so he could personally come and see it. Back to Myrrh. I found out through my study that Adonis dies in Mount Lebanon, Lebanon.
Wow. Okay.
This also begins my visualization and my 10 years of passion of believing and researching on what many would call blind faith, that Mount Lebanon and Pittsburgh are biblical.
Mm-hmm.
So that painting is above my bed, and I've sold it as prints in my store. And it was at that point in time that I realized that I had this ability to prophesize through my artwork. And it began my journey of sketching. There's so many more pieces and parts to this story, but I'm trying to synthesize it. I found that I was able to tap into what I believe is the Akashic record when I do what are called blinded sketches, where I close my eyes and I just allow myself to draw. And I open it and I thicken the lines. And then as I do that, I allow myself to wander. And I very much go from like the root of the tree and come up and then veer off to the right. The right is very important because the right is accessing the right side of our brain. And as I'm to do that, any question that comes to mind, it's almost as like I'm able to reach up and pull it down and I get words. And then those words send me on a journey of research. And it's as if technology is there to give me the information I seek. Things today are coming in so quickly, I don't always have the time to sketch it all in my journals. I've got books and books and books of journals of this knowledge, and there have been many generations of it. Back up again. As I start painting and I do this first exhibit, I meet a woman and we start the first generation of what is inner light. And that was at the time just called a pop-up shop because my father had a building on Beverly Road. And we were able to go in there, but I didn't know if what we wanted to sell and do, which was about crystals and my artwork and spiritual minded things, if Mount Lebanon had the consciousness for it. Yeah. So we did it for a 3-month test and we found, yes, in fact, they did. So then I went into 6-8 months of construction and we opened it up as Inner Roots. And it was a collaboration between myself and this business partner. And the fascinating thing, and it's another whole story, my stories are long and involved and all like link into one another. Her business was called Roots Naturals. And I told you about feeling like I was coming from the root of a tree. Well, she was a Reiki master. When I had my first meeting with her, there was some sort of divine guidance that brought us together that completely unlocked another whole aspect of my abilities. And she really started to put me onto a journey of pushing me to do more art, pushing me, because I wasn't really quite sure of where I wanted it to go. And that's how Inner Roots got started. And we did that several years. And then we eventually separated, and I renamed the business Inner Light, which is now fully, wholly mine, and more of a reflection of what I wanted to put forward and do put forward today.
Okay.
So today, I'd say that my spiritual journey is not just for me. It's very much involves the people that come through my door, or what I like to say, that fall into my nest. Since birds are a big theme of mine.
And that's better than come into my web.
Yeah, yes. And some come into my nest that just want the store for a gift shop. And then other people come in and feel and sense something different. And a big part of my journey is to help people be on their journey and to recognize that there is a spiritual calling, a mission to who they are and why they came to Earth at this moment in time. And this moment in time is a very important, very pivotal time, as we literally have moved into the age of Aquarius, and humanity's waking up. And what I am sure probably people on your podcast have talked about, the 3D, 4D, and 5D consciousness. Yes?
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
Yeah.
And who everybody is, and how to try and direct people onto their path and give them the tools in which to get there. Because I see so many people, and all of us know so many people that are not on their path, and they're struggling with depression or struggling with anxiety. And those are two perfect examples of people that aren't on their path. Right? The people that are in such pain because they know, like the 7-year-old me, they know that there's more to life, but they don't know how to get there. And they're still hidden under this wet blanket of false information. They're still believing that there is not a hidden hand in our world. Mm-hmm. They're still believing in the randomness, and they're not believing in an order. And that's what Qigong taught me. By the way, I got into Qigong as I started to experience all sorts of anxiety of coming from a very calm, peaceful life in France to the energy in America. And I needed to learn how to transmute that. Qigong gave that to me, but it also gave me a whole other body of knowledge.
Yeah.
So what I do in my shop today is to be the mirror for somebody, to help them step into who they are and what they can be. And it might just mean to help somebody realize that peacefulness can exist in their body again. People have forgotten what it feels like to be in stillness, to be in tranquility, to know what calmness in the body feels like. So when you walk into my store, it is very calm and tranquil.
Okay. We are out of time.
I'm sorry. My stories are long and involved.
Don't apologize. I'm just thrilled with your stories. And there's so many things I wanted to ask and comment on, but that's for another time.
Yes, maybe another time we do another one. I can get deeper into some of that.
So with the minute or so we have left, this is a time when you get to leave the audience with any words that you would like to leave them with. So words of wisdom, we call them, but they can be any words, anything you like them to take away from our discussion.
You are so much more than what you believe. And recently I had my 108 boxes come from France, and I found an old storyboard that I wrote. And that storyboard had this phrase: God, please help me to see everything about myself, no matter how beautiful it is. And I think that's what keeps us away from it, is that we are far more beautiful and far more gracious than we allow ourselves to be.
Those are great words to leave the audience with.
Mm-hmm.
So, beautiful people, look at what you've heard, take what resonates with you, put the rest on a shelf, and bring it down when you're ready to hear it. Until next time, this has been your spiritual journey.